And San Miguel County is a major tourism and resort destination. And for those wanting to explore everything that Colorado has to offer. So this would include high alpine lakes, elk sanctuaries, and a world-class ski resort in our backyard of Telluride.
Thanks, Xander. As was just mentioned, Telluride is a resort town, so the economy really is driven by tourism. And so we are all working to make that industry more sustainable, but we are also really focused on supporting the livelihoods of the people who are working in this town and in this entire community. So as a kind of summary, we're working to reduce and repair the environmental degradation that goes alongside increased tourism and visitation, but we're also addressing the social and cultural needs of the entire community.
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. Unfortunately, a really big issue that we face within Telluride, San Miguel County, and the surrounding region, which I think probably a lot of you are familiar with here too, is that there's a lot of disconnect in the community. More specifically, I'm talking about rural and urban communities, or for instance, we have a lot of indigenous communities in the region, and their culture is deeply ingrained into this land. This includes ranching and farming communities, service workers, and often that's in opposition with the second homeowners and people who are in a position of power. So all of our projects are really working to build a greater level of collaboration, connection, sustainability, and resiliency within our community. I think I speak for each of us when I say that we all have really strong, deep ties to the place that we call home, along with the rest of our community members, and we really want to work to help them and support them.
So as other members of my panel have mentioned, Telluride's economy is largely based off of service industry and tourism. So our projects really cover a breadth of different fields, from EV ready assessment plans for the county to wet meadow restoration for the Gunnison sage grouse. So we're really hoping to diversify the opportunities and move away from these traditional opportunities for future young people, Western students, and hopefully for us to continue working on these projects as we move forward with our career, to continue working in those fields. And we're excited to share all those projects with you.
Thanks, Paul. So just to wrap things up, we really want to reiterate that even though all our projects are pretty different, they're all rooted in our deep love and commitment to San Miguel County. We really believe that making Telluride a more sustainable and resilient community doesn't just look like one thing. It has to be a myriad of collaboration, different stakeholders at the table, creative minds, different passions, and love for the place that we call home. So we're going to start off with Paul Kieras.
All right, my name is Paul, and for my project, I'm developing a low-tech process-based restoration program in the San Miguel watershed. So I just threw a lot of words at you. I'm just going to break it down just a little bit. We've all heard from other members in other panels today a lot about low-tech process-based restoration, but just to put it in my own words, we're using low-tech, low-cost, in-stream structures to mimic natural processes such as wood accumulation and beaver activity. And then when I say the San Miguel watershed, the San Miguel is the river that runs through Telluride. Its headwaters are in Telluride, and it goes all the way to the Sandstone Canyons out near Naturita and Nucla. We're not doing low-tech process-based restoration just on the main stem. We're also including all the other streams and tributaries that run into it. And we can go to the next slide. So the problem that my project seeks to address is channel incision. And I think there's a good picture up figure A over here. Channel incision is the result of land management actions Peyton had mentioned, settlers coming in, making roads, as well as grazing and browsing, cattle, wildlife, removing vegetation from streams, which reduces the kind of reinforcement that those banks have, and the extirpation of beaver. So when a channel incises, it pretty much, water runs off the landscape very fast. lowering the stream bed channel elevation, and it reduces the water table. And we can see that in the picture in figure A. And this isn't necessarily a good thing ecologically. You can see all the vegetation in that photo. It's kind of drying out. Roots aren't saturated with water, drier soils, making it more prone to things like drought, wildfires, which are big natural disasters that we hear about in the news today. So the idea is to introduce these in-stream low-tech structures to slow down water velocities, reduce incision, and really spread water out onto the floodplains. And this ultimately, we can see in figure F, over time, water continues to hit these structures, deposition occurs, and we're reconnecting the river to the floodplain. And ultimately, you can see that water table, that blue line, is much closer to the surface now. And this is not only a good thing ecologically, but socially and economically. It promotes aquifer recharge. It can be an increase irrigation for farmers in the region. And we can go to the next slide. So I'm working with a number of stakeholders. I don't know if I mentioned this. My community sponsor is a small nonprofit called the San Miguel Watershed Coalition. That's who I'm doing my 600-hour project for. But we're partnering with federal agencies such as the BLM, U.S. Forest Service, and other private landowners to do a lot of the implementation and planning. One thing I should mention is all this work, as you guys have heard earlier, is happening a lot here in Gunnison and the surrounding area. I can't speak for every federal agency and nonprofit in San Miguel County, but this work isn't happening at large of a scale. So I'm really hoping to bring this kind of work to the San Miguel watershed, getting a lot of technical skills and asking a lot of questions to people who are doing that, ecometrics, alpine water resources. American Rivers has provided us a little bit of funding to really kickstart this work. I'm hoping to work with all of these different agencies to prioritize where we can get the most bang for our buck, where we can get the most aquifer recharge. So I'm going to create a prioritization map to identify those areas, as well as just create some resources to give to landowners about the importance of this kind of work, as well as a protocol that we can follow when we're at each site that will help guide what type of management action to make. And I will introduce the next person on my panel, Tessa Lightfoot, and she's going to talk to you about payment for ecosystem services.
Thanks, Paul. So my project is a payment for ecosystem service project, and I'm working to incentivize farmers to improve soil health in San Miguel County. So this program was developed last year in 2021, and I was a part of kind of creating the protocol. The west end of San Miguel County is primarily ranching and farming lands. So that's where I am really doing most of my work. And the goal is to promote soil health and carbon sequestration. So really the ecosystem service that is being measured is the amount of carbon that's being stored in the soil. So we're working with farmers and ranchers to switch their practices to ones that are more regenerative and that do promote soil health, which helps in overall climate mitigation and building local resiliency. And the local resiliency building is also happening through the actual support of farmers. So often implementing these practices can be costly. And in providing these financial incentives, it's helping them create that process. And this year is a bit of a transition year. The statewide STAR program, which is Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources, is a new program that's been developed this year, and we will be implementing it next year. So I am kind of creating a transition from our protocol to the statewide protocol. And you can go to the next slide. So the stakeholders that I'm working with primarily will be the farmers and ranchers involved in the program. This past year, we had 3 farmers. This year, we'll have 6 to 8. So it's really a capacity building year as well. The San Miguel County Board of County Commissioners is essential in this process. They really have the decision-making power, and they are deciding really the future of the program. And they're also the ones who elected to transition to the STAR program. The Chavano Conservation District will be taking over the management of the program next year, so I will be working closely with them to transition to their practices. Chris Hazen is my community sponsor, and he has been working closely with me to develop the protocol for this program. And Ground Up Consulting was hired to review our pilot program last year and make recommendations for next year and going forward. So at the end of this process, I'm going to create a review of the program we've created, and that will include a status update for each landowner, which will be kind of where they started and where they are now, so that whoever takes over next can continue the process and continue to improve degraded lands. I will also provide a comparative analysis of the county-wide PEZ program and the statewide STAR program that we are implementing. And lastly, I'll be doing the final report for the grant. And next up, we have Emma.
All right, everyone. My name is Emma Youngquist, and I am working on a wet meadow and riparian restoration in San Miguel County that is all in the name of sage grouse. A lot of similarities to Peyton's project here. Shout out. She laid a lot of the groundwork for me. I'm sure everyone's heard of the Gunnison sage grouse. If you're not super familiar, get ready for year one. You're going to learn a lot about them. They were actually discovered as a separate species from the greater sage grouse by our very own Dr. Jessica Young in the year 2000. And they were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 2014, which was very controversial and laid a whole motion of conservation into action. Okay, so the greatest population of sage grouse is actually here in the Gunnison Basin. It's about 99%, right around 3,000 birds currently. But the second largest population is in San Miguel County. We have around 300 birds. That's just about an hour out of Telluride up in Norwood. So you'll see that's Lone Cone. That's one of the areas that we're repairing where they migrate in the spring. So their biggest habitat or biggest threat currently is habitat loss and degradation at the hands of anthropogenic development, overgrazing, and drought. So my project is essentially split into two parts. I was hired by San Miguel County to coordinate the wet meadow restoration of Miramonte Meadows and then a tamarisk removal project in Dry Creek Basin. What's really cool is Colorado Parks and Wildlife actually counted 32 birds using the wet meadow in Miramonte this year. So it's pretty cool to see that they're actually where we're going to be restoring. Okay, so in the Miramonte Meadows, we're going to be using Z-dike structures, which Peyton touched on. They're a low-tech rock structure that is built into these head cuts that you'll see in the middle picture. They are basically designed to slow and disperse water so that it can be absorbed into the surrounding water table and defer the continued erosion of those head cuts. And then in the Dry Creek Basin, we're going to be removing tamarisk, which is an invasive species. It was originally brought over as an oriental shrub, and then it just got way out of control. It has a super deep root system, so it will outcompete any native plant and really dry up those stream beds. Stakeholders, got a lot of them. So this project originally started when Montezuma Land Conservancy applied for and received the Restore grant from NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They then allocated a part of that grant to San Miguel County, and the county hired me to work with Parks and Wildlife, BLM, and Fish and Wildlife to kind of revamp the San Miguel working group and also coordinate these two projects. So I've been working closely with CPW and the BLM to kind of determine the scope of the projects, what the end vision is. And then we have contracted Southwest Conservation Corps to bring on 2 crews and that are going to hit the ground in the fall and get a lot of the bulk of the actual work done. Next. Okay, so this is a field day that I had with Sean Connor. He's a biological consultant and he knows Z-dikes in and out. So he really helped us assess the land and kind of like create a plan. The grant is pretty strict. They originally outlined 2 metrics for both projects. One was 100 Z-dike structures and 100 acres of tamarisk removed, which is a lot. So after doing a bunch of site assessments and planning, we've nailed 35 structures that are realistic to build with the time and resources that we have. And some of these are really big, like 15 by 12. They're not small. And for the tamarisk removal, we're basically going to get as much done as we can with the chainsaw crew in a 5-week hitch. And then if we have resources left over, we'll probably hire some larger equipment to come in and get some of that out. We're also working on planning landowner field days with our co-partner group in Dolores County to host days where we can take landowners out and show them what these low-tech structures look like, because a lot of them are really interested in doing this work on their own land and seeing how much that it actually benefits and restores their wet meadows. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Xander, who's going to talk about his EV readiness plan for San Miguel County.
Yay.
So yeah, my name is Xander Critikos, and I'm creating a regional EV readiness and action plan for San Miguel and Uribe County. So I'm working with Eco Action Partners. That's my community sponsor. It's a nonprofit located out of Telluride, Colorado. And I guess the first logical question is, what exactly is an EV readiness? EV standing for electric vehicle, EV readiness and action plan. So essentially, it's a set of strategies, policies, and recommendations that aims to empower EVs and EV infrastructure in a given region. Next slide. So yeah, why would an EV readiness plan actually matter? So when I joined this program, this statistic always kind of stood out to me. Its transportation sector represents 27% of total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. That's far above the electricity production sector, which is like 23%. So EVs create considerably lower emissions. And some recent events, the Federal Highway Administration just awarded Colorado $57 million. This is going to happen over a 5-year span, and this is going to go directly towards EV corridors in Colorado. One of which is US 550, which is our $1 million highway. This goes from Montrose through Uribe, through Silverton down to Durango. So the significance of this is this technology is here and we are not prepared. So now is the time to create a plan to be ready for it. Some potential deliverables include coordinating and facilitating a regional EV task force, assessing existing infrastructure and gaps in our community when it comes to EV infrastructure, and examining key barriers to increased adoption. Next slide. So yeah, we all have several stakeholders at the table. Currently, I can identify San Miguel and Uribe County governments. San Miguel Power Association is our local utility provider, and in the next 5 years, they'll be 50% like renewable energy, which is pretty cool. Also, local HOAs, specifically looking at multifamily units, local car dealerships, Eco Action Partners, of course, charging station networks, and lastly, we have Western Colorado University. So that's a little bit about my EV readiness plan. And next we have Leah discussing her project.
All right, I'm Leah. And for the next year, I plan to be working to enhance inclusivity and cross-cultural collaboration within Telluride Institute's Watershed Education Program. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so firstly, Telluride Institute is a nonprofit organization located in Telluride. They run both environmental and community programs. Recently, I was given the opportunity to take over the Watershed Education Program Director position. The Watershed Education Program has been around for over 30 years, and they've worked with teachers in different schools to provide educational opportunities in the outdoors. However, with the state of our climate and everything that's been going on in the world, it's really important that we include different voices. So I'm motivated to increase inclusivity and cross-cultural collaboration through educational opportunities. In order to do this, I have a few objectives for my project. One of the objectives is to try to uplift different experiences with connection to place, as well as different experiences with knowledge. There's not one way of knowing, and I really want to represent this through the program that I'm running. Next, I want to emphasize relationship building and kinship with land and people that goes above and beyond transactional interactions. I think sometimes in the nonprofit world, even though we're out there to do good work, we get caught up in getting the job done instead of really meeting people's needs and emphasizing that we care about people and that we want to help them. And then lastly, I want to make sure that, we're serving the needs of the local and regional community members. This program has really been focused in Telluride and other parts of San Miguel County, but I want to reach past that, and I want to do more work in Montezuma County and with our indigenous communities. You can go to the next slide. So because I'm focusing on inclusivity, there are many stakeholders, and I don't even think they can all be included onto this page, but these are the biggest ones. So Telluride Institute, because that's who I'm working for and who I'm representing. Even this past summer, I already worked with a number of educational organizations like Telluride Academy, Pinhead Institute, and others like the library who holds events for educational opportunities and things like that. I will also be working with Telluride School District, who has been part of this project since the beginning, or part of this program since the beginning, but it extends past that into other schools too. They're a really important stakeholder because during the year, teachers participate in these programs with their classrooms, and so their state standards are a really important incentive for why they should come out in the field with us and take a day away from school. And then I will also be working with Montezuma Land Conservancy and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe in order to integrate different forms of knowledge and collaborative projects that serve all of our communities and what each of our community members' needs are. And then lastly, Western and my advisor, Dr. Z, have been very helpful in this process. Next slide. So as of right now, my anticipated deliverables will be to create a project review and assessment that can be used for future grant opportunities, and just to make sure that the work we're doing is really meeting everyone's needs and not just even what I think is best sometimes. And then I will be creating a FUSE and climate change curriculum that acknowledges all aspects of the watershed in San Miguel County. FUSE stands for Food, Water, and Energy Systems. And I think it's valuable that we focus above and beyond just water, but how water functions in our communities. And I want to teach that to students and other members of the community. And then lastly, I'm going to focus on creating collaborative community projects and emphasizing service learning through these programs. This is actually a photo last year. Montezuma Land Conservancy, Telluride Institute, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, and a few other organizations got together to eat food and have storytelling about our cultures and our connections to land. And it was really powerful. And we hope to have more events like that in the future. And service learning is really valuable because it allows us to give back to the community and take action above and beyond just learning material and talking about subject matters, but getting our hands in the dirt and making something happen. So yeah, next slide. And we're ready for some questions. Yeah?
I have a question for Emma. Do you guys consider using tamarisk beetle to help with those removal efforts? And if so, why not?
So the Tamarisk project is headed by the BLM. So I'm really working under a lot of direction there. I think the scope of the amount that they want to get done, the grant ends this spring. So that's kind of like when the money is shut off. If there's renewed funding, which we are looking for, there's definitely room for that. But right now, they're focused on chainsaw removal and then treatments with spraying, potentially getting large equipment in there, which I don't know how I really feel about, but I'm getting paid for it. So.
My question's also for you, Emma. I was wondering just if you could talk more on your own understanding of the complications and the nuances with the southwestern willow flycatcher breeding in tamarisk trees, and as you're removing these tamarisk trees in order to help another endangered bird, and just kind of the complication.
Definitely.
You can repeat the question.
So she was asking about the southwestern willow flycatcher, which is an endangered species that utilizes tamarisk, and how that balances with restoring and removing tamarisk for another endangered bird species. That is definitely a very complicated topic. As far as we know, the flycatcher is not in the Dry Creek area. It has been surveyed by CPW for that specific reason. It also is on a private parcel of land. It's privately owned by the Snyders, and they have kind of a specific vision for what they want done. Historically, we don't actually see sage grouse in the Dry Creek Basin anymore because it is so dry, they actually can't survive there. So it's more of like a long-term, perhaps if we get this working as like a stream bed again, they'll maybe be able to use that. But right now it's really not inhabitable for much because it's so degraded. So I think their thoughts is we're going to start with the obvious one. But tamarisk is actually very complicated and controversial, removing it.
My question is for Xander. I was wondering what the indicators of readiness are for a community about EV transportation.
Yeah, so the question was, what are the indicators of readiness in a community? So this can come down to infrastructure. So looking at, multifamily housing and employee parking, having the electricity voltage to be able to accommodate, that kind of charging. So that is one part of, being EV ready. Questions?
Got a question for Tessa. I was wondering, what's been the kind of like cultural response with the farmers in San Miguel for kind of the practices you're talking to them about, potentially changing up things that they've done for generations?
Yeah, so the question was about working with farmers and ranchers and how that conversation has been going to change practices to more regenerative ones, especially working with multi-generational farms and ranches. That is definitely a challenge. And in the pilot year, we were really working with friendly actors just to kind of establish the protocol we were using because it was a newly developed program. So we wanted to kind of have all of our ducks in line just so that we could be organized going forward. And this year we have been trying to expand kind of beyond just the friendly actors. And it has been challenging, especially when people have been spraying their fields and using herbicides and pesticides, and it works. And that's a challenge we continue to face, but I think that also a lot of our approach has been working with farmers who are respected in the community. And so they are implementing these practices and seeing them work, and they're helping promote that conversation. So it's not just coming from us, it's coming from people within the community who have credibility and who, already are well positioned to kind of communicate this perspective.
My question's for Xander. Are you modeling your EV readiness plan off of any other mountain communities, or are you hoping to expand it to other communities after San Miguel County?
That's a good question. So the question is, are we modeling our EV readiness plan off of other communities? And we definitely are. And it's interesting because if you're looking at a EV readiness plan from 2017, it looks completely different than a 2019, than a 2021. So Aspen, that's kind of the main one we're looking at. Fort Collins has a pretty good one as well. So the answer is yes, we're definitely taking a good look at those right now. Mm-hmm.
All right, that's kind of all of the vocabulary.